Before that, we have our keynote speech for this afternoon. Very pleased to say we can now discuss the mathematics of climate protection and which EU strategy should follow for the transport sector. Delighted to be joined now by Professor Dr. Thomas Willner from the Hamburg University of Applied Sciences. Thomas, over to you. Well, Thomas, I believe you might have your microphone still on mute.
Thanks a lot, Sasha.
Yeah, we can now hear you.
Sasha. Yeah, you're right. Thanks a lot for your kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this very interesting and encouraging event. I welcome all of you. So I hope now that you can see the first slide. Is it correct?
Yes, we can see a slide, yes.
That's fine. Yeah. Yeah, what we're talking about global warming. Global warming is a matter of natural physics. Thus, we have to consider physical laws for climate protection. Unfortunately, as I obey, the politics is currently not doing this sufficiently by focusing on electrification for all sectors, including e-mobility, as we see. And so in this sense, I can support the panelists we have just heard and agree to them. And last but not least, we should remember that physical laws are not politically negotiable. On the next slide, we'll see the mathematics of climate protection derived from these physical laws. And here we are. The IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, gives us the data for the mathematics of climate protection. And here it is visualized. The data shown here are for the 1.5 degree target, as policymakers remain officially committed to this target. And the diagram shows the annual CO2 emissions over time in annual figures. The current level of global CO2 emissions is about 40 gigatons of CO2 every year. We see on the vertical axis in the diagram. The total CO2 budget, on the other hand, counted from the end of this year is about 260 gigatons of CO2. That is the maximum amount of CO2 we are allowed to release to the atmosphere for the 1.5 degree target, according to the IPCC. The area under each emission curve, what you see here is the CO2 budget consumed. Let's start with the discussion of the red-colored horizontal line in this diagram. I called it no action scenario. That is a scenario without any reduction of CO2. And thus, the budget is shrinking by 40 gigatons of CO2 every year. According to that, 260 divided by 40, that's only 6.5 years left until this CO2 budget is exhausted in this no action scenario. This is a very short time. And we're still, at the end, we're still the emission level of 40 gigatons per year. And nothing has been done. In the green scenario, on the other hand, I call it correct action scenario. We start with a CO2 reduction immediately. And in this linear reduction scenario, we would gain more time. We double the time. And we reach zero emission at the end, as you see. And the target year would be 2035 in this case. If we wait one more year with a reduction, with start of reduction, the target year of the green line will be 2034, 1 year earlier, comes toward us. Thus, if we wait 1 year, we lose 2 years for the green reduction line, and so on. By the way, the target year 2045 or 2050 of politics, we hear again and again, is not relevant anymore for the 1.5 degree target. We see the time left for climate protection is extremely short. Based on that, I defined 3 very simple climate protection measures, 3 criteria for climate protection measures. that must be generally fulfilled. And the first one is no delay. I call it no delay. That means we have to start immediately. It doesn't make sense to install a measure for climate protection that starts in 5 or even more years later. And the second one is no greenhouse gas export. That means we have to look at the entire value chain. It doesn't make sense that we install a measure, we count it with 0 emission in a certain land or sector, and this causes high CO2 emissions elsewhere, in other countries, for instance. And the third one, also very, very important, is fast rollout of successful technologies, as I must add, because the climate protection, as we all know, is a global task. And it can only be succeed in international cooperation. It succeeds internationally or not. Just as an example, the EU counts for only 9% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And if the EU would be climate neutral immediately, right now, just as an hypothesis, would not even save these 9% of greenhouse gas emissions, because the only saving is the oil, coal, and gas we keep down the earth. We don't exploit. That means the only countries in the world who can do active climate protection are the exploiters of oil, coal, and gas, if they keep it down the earth. So what does it mean now for the road transport sector? These 3 criteria. Let's have a look at the no delay criterion. The alternative fuels, gaseous fuels, both gaseous fuels and liquids, would have an immediate effect in the large existing fleet. And we talk about 1.4 billion of cars. Unfortunately, the e-mobility has a huge delay of at least 5 and sometimes to 15 years delay, and no effect on the existing car fleet. And the exchange of the car fleet takes much too long. What about no greenhouse gas export? In this case, alternative fuels have already a great performance, including biomethane. The average of all alternative fuels available in the market in Germany, just to take this example, is 83% of greenhouse gas reduction. That's a very good performance. So nearly no greenhouse gas export. Just the opposite in the e-mobility. There we have a huge greenhouse gas export. What is not counted here in Europe or in the transport sector, mainly for battery production and recycling, for building up new infrastructure, and of course for fossil power production for charging these cars. And what about a fast rollout of successful technologies? Here we have a big chance with alternative fuels, especially with e-fuels, so-called e-fuels. If we export our renewable energy technology to countries with a surplus of renewable energy, and they can produce the green fuels and they can sell us the green fuels, then they have a good business with this on the long term. On the other hand, Germany and Europe, we have a very high demand of energy import. Germany has 70% of energy import, and the EU now it's 28 numbers, 58%, but it should be similar with the EU 27. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is sustainable alternative fuels fulfill all of the 3 criteria for climate protection. And according to that, they must be promoted as a matter of priority. And the electric mobility does not fulfill any of the 3 criteria for this climate protection. And therefore, it should be ruled out as a medium-term climate protection measure. And that means the excessive one-sided promotion of electric mobility has to be stopped immediately. And we have a huge amount of studies on that, and all come to the same conclusion, at least regarding this huge delay. I want to mention especially the French economics study of 2020. They analyzed more than 80, it's a meta study, they analyzed more than 80 studies and came to the conclusion we have a delay, an average delay of 10 years at least. Now, what we are talking about, if we're talking about alternative fuels, today we are in a session for gaseous fuels, and they will play an important role. But I want to mention that we are talking about all of them. And we're talking about liquids and gases. And we need not only biodiversity, we also need technology diversity. And we're talking about at least 5 groups of process of biofuels, alternatives, sorry. The first generation biofuels we all know, they're already in the market, including the biomethane from agricultural crops. The second generation biofuels, again, including gaseous variants such as hydrogen and biomethane from waste material and residues from different sources, agriculture, forestry, and so on. And the next one also important is the recycled carbon fuels from non-biogenic waste, such as plastics. We have a lot of plastics swimming in the ocean. It has to get back this, and it's a catastrophe for the environment. And then we come to the electric fuels, the electricity-based fuels, the e-fuels or power-to-X fuels, again, including hydrogen and synthetic methane or ammonia and others from countries with a surplus of renewable energy already mentioned. And last but not least, the highly efficient combinations, intelligent combinations of these so-called hybrids. So it's, for instance, biomass or waste-based power-to-X fuels. What is now about the EU strategy following from that? And I think there are a few points we should address. One is the EU should be interested in real physical climate protection by real global physical CO2 reduction. That means looking at this background, the scientific analysis background, we need a transfer of the financial support from e-mobility to alternative fuel technology and production. And again, want to emphasize all kinds of alternative fuels. And second is technology export is key. And I mean technology export for alternative fuels production. Then we start immediately with the international cooperation, what we need urgently, and we create many new jobs. The next point, very important, is we need import of green molecules from countries with a surplus of renewable energy instead of fossil resources. And I have already mentioned the high energy import demand of Germany and the EU. I think the second strategy point should be that the EU should be interested in this import of green molecules to meet the energy import demand. And if the molecules are here, then the most efficient use of the imported green molecules is non-electricity combustion systems such as ICEs, the internal combustion engines, and oil and gas heating systems. That means a ban on the ICEs would be a major strategic mistake. And the third one is the EU should be interested in supporting the automotive industry, sure. Let's have a look at China, the largest automotive market. China is relying on ICEs on the long term. China had focused on e-mobility in the past, but China has stopped this because China has recognized at least 2 things. The first is e-mobility doesn't help the climate. The second is e-mobility has a huge demand for raw materials, and China doesn't want to spoil its resources for e-mobility. I must say, China has clever strategists in politics, and I hope we will find some clever strategists in the EU politics also. And again, I must add the large territorial states and poorer countries, an example would be Africa, South America also, and so on. They would stick to the ICEs also. And again, a ban on ICEs in the EU would be a major strategic mistake. Let's have a look at the raw material situation. In this case, we have a strong dependency on China already, but the EU should be interested in minimizing this. Therefore, the focus on the electrification of all sectors would be a major strategic mistake because it would maximize this dependency. And you can see here in the slide, the last report of the International Energy Agency shows very clearly all critical raw materials for electrification are dominated by China. And last but not least, the EU should minimize the risk of blackouts. And again, I must say the focus on all electric concepts would be a major strategic mistake due to the risk of extremely high peaks in the power consumption. And I'll give you one example. Maybe you've heard about that the UK has already banned the private charging of e-cars from March 2022 on in certain times during the day, between 8 and 11 a.m. and 4 and 10 p.m. And why? Due to increasing risk of blackout. The grids will get more and more fragile. What is the messages for the EU now from that? And what you're seeing is the focus on e-mobility and the ban of ICEs would be really a major strategic mistake. And alternative fuels must be set on the highest priority level. And we need all kinds of these, including the first generation. And the legal hurdles, we have already heard a little bit about that, that are the obstacles to investors have to be abolished. And the most important point is the fleet CO2 regulation system. That is really the biggest obstacle for investments and for the climate protection in the transport sector. And it simply contradicts physical laws, as battery electric vehicles are counted with zero emission, but renewable fuels do not count at all. That means if the fuel is 100% renewable, it wouldn't count. And that is absolutely nonsense for climate protection. So these regulation needs to be corrected. And we have already heard about the main problem. That's a tailpipe approach. We need at least the well-to-wheel, or better the cradle-to-cradle approach. And now I come to an end with a call to action to all of you and all of us. Yes, we have 5 groups of alternative fuels. The gaseous fuels will play an important role, but not the only one. And we need all effective options we have available for energy transition and for the transport sector. The e-mobility is definitely no effective option, as we have seen. And all stakeholders for alternative fuels should work together, please. That's a point that was not optimal in the past. And I would like to say, your enemies are not the potential competitor on the left side or on the right side. Maybe the enemy is what we have heard, the tailpipe approach. And that has to be corrected. And we have to fight for this all together. Thank you so much for your attention, and I thank you with this small joke.
Professor Willner, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for your contribution. Very good to see you. Thank you. And very clear messages there, underlying the need for speed, the need to roll out new technologies, and as that final point, all working together as well.